My name is Brian Carter, 35, and for most of my life, I've been a sailor. The sea has always been my sanctuary, a place of solitude, adventure, and calm. While back home in Savannah, Georgia, I had a life that seemed just as steady. Karen, my wife, and I have been married for 7 years, and she always claimed to understand my way of life. She never complained about the months I'd be away on voyages. Instead, she'd say, "It gives us something to look forward to." I believed her. The sea can be harsh and unforgiving, but nothing prepared me for what I found when I came home unexpectedly one evening after a grueling 9-month voyage. I was supposed to return in a week, but an early docking meant I could surprise Karen. I could already imagine her joy when I walked through the door, maybe even catching her making one of her signature pies, with the smell of cinnamon filling the house. When I pulled into the driveway, it was empty. Odd, but Karen had plenty of friends and social activities. I let myself in quietly, hoping to catch her in a relaxed moment. As soon as I stepped inside, though, something felt off. The house was too quiet. No radio, no clattering dishes, just silence. Then, I heard a faint, rhythmic thudding sound from the basement. My heart raced, though I told myself it was nothing. Maybe Karen was working on something downstairs. But the sounds didn't stop. Muffled voices, laughter, and the unmistakable sound of chains. My pulse quickened, a strange unease settling in. I approached the basement door, careful not to make a sound as I descended the stairs. I wish I hadn't. There, in the center of the basement, was Karen. She was tied up, blindfolded, surrounded by 4 men. This wasn't just infidelity. It was something darker. One of the men was Brad, a neighbor I'd shared beers with, the same guy who always helped me with yard work. The others were her colleagues from work, men I had trusted. What I saw twisted my insides. They didn't even notice me at first. They were too caught up in their depravity. I stood frozen, my mind swirling between disbelief, fury, and betrayal. The scene before me shattered everything I thought I knew about Karen, about our marriage. Every moment I'd trusted her, every goodbye kiss before setting off to sea, now felt like a lie. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. But in that paralysis, something clicked. I wasn't going to explode in rage, burst into the room, and shout. No, I wanted more than that. They deserved to feel the pain I felt, the slow burn of betrayal. Quietly, I slipped back upstairs and closed the basement door. I wasn't going to confront them, not yet. First, I needed a plan. One that would ruin every single person involved in this twisted secret Karen had been hiding. They would pay, and not just in one swift blow, but in a series of calculated, devastating moves that would dismantle their lives piece by piece. As I sat down in the kitchen, the weight of what I had seen pressed down on me, but beneath it all was the spark of something new: revenge. In the days that followed, I played the role of the clueless, loving husband. I'd walk into the kitchen in the mornings, give Karen a kiss on the cheek, and ask her about her day, just like I always had. She smiled sweetly, always the picture of innocence. But now I saw the cracks in her facade. I'd catch her phone lighting up late at night with messages she thought I couldn't see, or hear her take whispered calls from the bathroom, giggling like a schoolgirl. I'd nod along as she explained she was meeting up with the girls, or working late. Inside, I was boiling with rage, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed more than just the memory of that night in the basement. I needed hard evidence. So, I started with her phone. Karen had never been particularly tech-savvy, and it didn't take much effort to get into her phone while she was asleep. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. The texts weren't just between her and the 4 men I had seen, they were part of a larger group. There were dates, locations, explicit details, even photos. It was clear this wasn't a one-off event. This had been going on for years, stretching back to almost the beginning of our marriage. It sickened me to my core, but I kept scrolling, kept digging. I found her messages with Brad first, filled with disgusting innuendos and jokes about how clueless I was while I was off at sea. Karen had orchestrated the whole thing. She was the ringleader. I saved everything: the texts, the photos, even their plans for future meetings. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was stronger than ever. Once I had the evidence, I started making plans. I wasn't just going to confront her and walk away. No, I was going to ruin everyone involved. I wanted Karen and her sick little crew to feel the pain of everything they'd done, but I couldn't rush it. I needed to be patient, careful. I started small, with Brad, the retired guy next door. Brad had a wife, Betty. Sweet woman, always brought us cookies during the holidays, none the wiser about her husband's double life. I decided she deserved to know what was going on. One evening, I knocked on Betty's door with an envelope in hand. When she answered, I smiled and said, "Hey Betty, I think there's something you need to see." She invited me in, confused but polite. I handed her the envelope and watched as she opened it. Inside were printed screenshots of Brad's text with Karen, along with photos that left no room for doubt. Her face went pale as she flipped through the pages, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry you have to find out like this," I said, my voice calm. "But you deserve the truth." Betty didn't say much after that, just thanked me quietly and asked me to leave. A few days later, Brad was gone. Word spread fast in the neighborhood, and soon everyone knew about Brad's betrayal. He'd moved out, tail between his legs, his reputation shattered. Betty filed for divorce within the week. But that was just the beginning. The others, Kevin and Paul, worked with Karen. They had families of their own, wives who, like Betty, had no idea what their husbands were up to. I took my time gathering dirt on them. Karen's phone was a treasure trove of information, texts, emails, photos. It was more than enough to ruin them. When I had everything I needed, I compiled the evidence and sent it anonymously to their HR department. It wasn't long before both of them were fired for inappropriate conduct and breaching company policy. I made sure their wives got copies of the evidence, too. Kevin and Paul's worlds crumbled as their families found out the truth. Their marriages fell apart, and soon enough, they were jobless, homeless, and completely humiliated. Watching their lives unravel gave me a dark sense of satisfaction, but the final act, the one that mattered most, was still to come. Karen had no idea what was coming her way. I wanted to make her downfall spectacular, public, and absolute. It wasn't enough to just expose her. I wanted everyone she loved, everyone she knew, to see her for who she truly was. Now that Brad, Kevin, and Paul were dealt with, it was time to focus on the main event, Karen. Every part of me burned to confront her, to demand why she had betrayed me so completely, but that would have been too easy, too quick. Karen deserved a downfall as twisted as the lies she had told, and I was going to make sure it was a spectacle she wouldn't forget. I spent the next few weeks laying the groundwork for her ultimate humiliation. Our anniversary was approaching, and I planned to make it a night she and everyone she cared about would never forget. Karen had no idea what was coming. She continued her routine of deceit, oblivious to the fact that I had gathered every sordid detail of her secret life. I played the role of the devoted husband perfectly. I made a big deal out of our upcoming anniversary, telling her I wanted to host a special dinner at home, just for the two of us. She smiled at me, her face lighting up with excitement, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit her life. What she didn't know was that I had invited a few more guests to our little celebration, her closest friends, her family, and even her parents. People who had always admired her as the supportive wife of a sailor, the woman who patiently waited for me to return from the sea. They all believed the same lie I had for years. On the night of the dinner, everything was perfect. I had prepared Karen's favorite meal, bought her favorite flowers, and even had a bottle of expensive wine waiting. She was completely disarmed, smiling brightly as she came downstairs in a beautiful dress. I could see the relief in her eyes, like she thought our marriage was on solid ground again. When her parents and friends began to arrive, she seemed a little surprised but didn't question it. "I just thought we could make the evening extra special," I said, wrapping an arm around her waist and guiding her to the dining room. She beamed, thinking I had gone the extra mile to celebrate us. As everyone gathered around the table, chatting and laughing, I stood at the head with a glass of wine in hand. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate a very special occasion," I said, smiling warmly at Karen. She blushed, clearly enjoying the attention. "It's been 7 amazing years with this wonderful woman, and I thought it was time to show you all just how much she means to me." Karen's friends looked at her, admiring her like she was the perfect wife. Her parents smiled with pride, believing I was about to give a heartfelt speech. But instead of pouring out compliments, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "I've put together a little slideshow," I said, clicking a button on my phone. "A collection of memories from the last few years. I hope you all enjoy." The TV on the wall flickered to life, and at first, it was just a few pictures of Karen and me, our wedding day, vacations, happy moments we'd shared. She smiled at the photos, looking around the room with pride. But then, the images changed. Suddenly, there were texts on the screen. Explicit messages between Karen and Brad, then Kevin, then Paul. The room fell silent as the words flashed across the TV, each one more damning than the last. Karen's face turned ghostly white as she realized what was happening. Gasps filled the room as photo after photo appeared, each one more incriminating than the one before. Images of her in compromising positions with these men, undeniable proof of her betrayal. "What is this?" her mother whispered, covering her mouth in shock. Her father's face darkened, anger swelling behind his eyes. Karen's eyes darted around the room, panic taking hold. "Brian, stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please." But I wasn't done. I kept the slideshow rolling, letting every disgusting detail of her secret life play out in front of the people who had trusted and loved her the most. Her friends sat in stunned silence, some turning away in disbelief. Her parents looked like they had been slapped, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. 7 years of marriage, I said, my voice now colder than the room itself. And this is how she spent her time while I was away. Not just with one man, but several neighbors, co-workers, people we both knew. I let the silence hang in the air, the weight of her deceit crushing everyone in the room. Karen was sobbing now, trying to speak, but her words were lost in the chaos. "I can explain, she stammered, but no one was listening anymore. Her friends looked at her in horror. Her parents couldn't even meet her eyes. I had succeeded. In one swift move, I had destroyed everything she had worked so hard to keep hidden. I set down my glass and turned to her. "Happy anniversary, Karen," I said softly, before walking out of the room, leaving her to face the devastation she had brought on herself. The silence behind me was deafening. As I walked out of the dining room, leaving Karen sobbing amidst the ruins of her reputation, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The storm had passed, at least for me. But for Karen, it was just beginning. I knew the next few days would be a whirlwind of shame, anger, and broken relationships, and I was more than ready to watch it all unfold. I spent the night at a hotel. I didn't need to stick around to see the aftermath. I knew exactly how it would go. Karen would try to explain, to salvage whatever shreds of dignity she had left. But there was no coming back from this. Not with her parents, not with her friends, and certainly not with me. I had made sure of that. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop with messages from mutual friends, Karen's family, and even a few curious neighbors. Word had spread fast. Savannah wasn't exactly a small town, but it felt like one when it came to gossip, and this kind of scandal was bound to make waves. I ignored most of the messages, deleting the ones from people who claimed they just wanted to understand what happened. What happened was simple. Karen had betrayed me, and now she was paying the price. Later that afternoon, I drove back to the house. The driveway was empty, but the front door was unlocked. I stepped inside, expecting to find Karen waiting, ready to beg for forgiveness. Instead, the house was eerily quiet, just like it had been the night I came home early. I walked into the living room, and there she was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Her makeup was smeared from crying, and her once perfectly styled hair was now a mess. She didn't look up when I walked in. She was a shell of the woman she had been just 24 hours ago. "I didn't think you'd come back," she whispered, her voice hollow. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "I didn't come back for you, Karen. I came back for the house, for my things." She flinched at my words but didn't argue. There was no point. She knew she had lost. "Brian, please, you don't understand. It wasn't supposed to stop," I said sharply, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't care why you did it. The fact is, you did. You lied to me, to everyone we know, for years. And now, You're going to have to live with the consequences. She finally looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. I made a mistake, she said, her voice trembling. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Please. I still love you. I almost laughed. The audacity of it. After everything she had done, she still thought there was a chance to fix things. Love? I repeated. Is that what you call what you've been doing behind my back all these years? Was it love when you slept with our neighbors? With your coworkers? Was it love when you brought them into our home? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I don't know why I did it. I was lonely. You were always gone, and I felt abandoned. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. So, your solution was to betray me? To throw away everything we built together because you felt abandoned? I was working, Karen. I was out at sea, providing for us, trusting you, while you were busy throwing yourself at other men. I never stopped loving you, she cried, standing up now, desperate to reach me. I made mistakes, but we can get through this. We can go to counseling. We can work on it. Please, Brian, don't just throw it all away. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. No, Karen. You threw it away the moment you decided my trust wasn't enough for you. She crumbled then, sinking back onto the couch, her sobs racking her body. I can't lose you, she whimpered. I don't know how to live without you. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the months, the years of lies, the twisted games she had played while I was away. The pity vanished. You already lost me, I said coldly. You lost me the moment I walked into that basement. She covered her face with her hands, her entire world collapsing around her. And I let it. This was the bed she had made, and now she would lie in it. I've already filed for divorce, I added, watching her flinch at the finality in my voice. The papers will be here by the end of the week. You'll sign them, and we'll be done. Brian, no, she cried out, scrambling to her feet again. Please, I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll never speak to them again. We can move away, start over. I'll be the wife you deserve, I swear. I shook my head. It's too late for that, Karen. You don't get to rewrite the story now. With that, I turned and walked toward the door, leaving her behind without another glance. As I stepped outside, the weight I'd carried for so long began to lift. Karen's life was in ruins, and there was no escaping it now. She would have to live with the consequences of her actions, and I would move forward without her. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. And now that the worst was over, I was ready to do just that. I didn't look back as I left the house. For too long, I'd let Karen's betrayal poison my life. But now, I was done with that chapter, ready to move forward and leave the wreckage of our marriage behind me. The divorce papers were already in motion, and I made sure they were airtight. I wasn't just taking back my dignity, I was taking back everything. The house, the savings, even our dog. Max. Karen would have nothing, and she had no one else to blame. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls with lawyers, moving my things out of the house, and mentally preparing for the next stage of my life. Karen, as expected, tried to reach me, leaving messages and texts, apologizing and pleading. But I never responded. There was nothing left to say. By the end of the week, I had moved into a new apartment downtown. It wasn't big, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of freedom, no more wondering what was happening behind my back. No more lies to sift through. It was just me, Max, and the open road ahead. I threw myself into work, eager to keep my mind busy, but when the nights grew quiet, I'd sit on my small balcony, sipping a beer, reflecting on everything. The house I left behind felt like a distant memory. Karen felt like someone I didn't even know anymore. How had it all gone so wrong? And yet, despite the pain of it all, there was something cathartic in the destruction. Watching Karen's world crumble felt like justice, but it also made me realize how much of myself I'd lost in that marriage. I had let my life be defined by my career and by the idea of Karen, the perfect wife waiting for me. But she was never that person. I just didn't want to see it. A few weeks passed, and I started settling into my new routine. One evening, as I was walking Max along the riverfront, I ran into an old friend, Jake. We hadn't seen each other in years, not since high school, but we picked up right where we left off. We grabbed a drink at a nearby bar, and it wasn't long before I found myself opening up about everything that had happened. Jake listened, his expression hardening as I told him about Karen's betrayal and the elaborate revenge I'd pulled off. When I finished, he shook his head and whistled. Man, that's insane. But you know what? She got what was coming to her. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. It was the first time I had talked about it with someone who wasn't directly involved, and hearing Jake say it out loud made it feel real. I had done the right thing. I had fought back, and I had won. Now what? Jake asked, raising his glass. What's next for Brian Carter? I shrugged, still unsure. I don't know. I guess. Figure out what life looks like without all that drama. Start fresh. Starting fresh sounds good, he said, clinking his glass against mine. Here's to new beginnings. And that's exactly what I set out to do. I threw myself into hobbies I hadn't had time for in years: fishing, hiking, even some woodworking. Max loved our long walks in the park, and I found myself enjoying the quiet moments of solitude I had once feared. The loneliness I had anticipated after the split wasn't so bad after all. It was peaceful, but as much as I tried to focus on myself, Karen's name kept popping up around town. Savannah was a small place, and people talked. Word of her downfall spread like wildfire. The humiliation she had faced during our anniversary dinner was the talk of every social circle we had once been a part of. I heard that she had left her job and moved in with a friend, unable to show her face at work. Her parents were devastated, and her friendships were in ruins. One day, I ran into one of our mutual friends, Amanda, at the grocery store. She stopped me, her face flushed with discomfort. Brian, I don't know what to say. What happened with Karen was awful. I gave her a polite smile, not wanting to get into it. It is what it is. It's over now. She hesitated, then blurted out, Karen's not doing well. I raised an eyebrow, feeling a flicker of curiosity. Not doing well? Amanda bit her lip, glancing around before lowering her voice. She's been staying with a friend, but she's falling apart. I'm not trying to make excuses for her, but she's hit rock bottom, Brian. I didn't respond immediately. A part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, knowing that she was suffering after everything she had put me through. But another part of me, one I hadn't expected, felt something closer to pity. Amanda looked at me, unsure of how to proceed. I know you have every right to be angry, but I just thought you should know. I thanked her and walked away, unsure of how to process what I'd heard. Karen was paying the price for her actions, and in some ways, it felt like I had gotten everything I wanted. But standing there, in the middle of a grocery store, I realized that revenge wasn't as sweet as I had imagined it would be. I had won, yes, but the victory didn't bring me the peace I thought it would. Instead, it left me with questions about who I was now and what I wanted next. As I left the store, I looked up at the setting sun, feeling the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders. Maybe revenge wasn't the answer after all. Maybe it was time to truly move on, not just from Karen, but from the anger that had fueled me for so long. It was time to start building something new. In the weeks that followed, I focused on building a life that felt like mine again. The fury that had once consumed me had started to fade, and I found myself looking toward the future instead of being stuck in the past. The satisfaction of watching Karen's world fall apart had come and gone, leaving me with a blank slate and a desire for something more. Work was steady, and I poured myself into it during the day. But it was the evenings that became my time to breathe. I spent more time outdoors, often heading out on my boat, alone with the waves and the open sky. Max was my constant companion, always by my side, and for the first time in a long time, I felt content. But the specter of Karen's collapse lingered in the background. Rumors about her kept finding their way to me, even when I wasn't looking for them. Friends, neighbors, people who knew us both, it seemed like everyone had an opinion. Some were shocked by what had happened, while others quietly whispered that Karen had been asking for it all along. One night, after a long day, I received a message that stopped me in my tracks. It was from Karen. She had been silent since I left, but this wasn't an apology or a plea for forgiveness. It was just one line. I need to talk to you. I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore her completely, to let her continue dealing with the fallout on her own. But there was another part of me that was curious to hear what she could possibly have to say after all this time. Finally, I replied, "Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. The park by the river." The next day, I stood by the water's edge, waiting. The park was quiet, with only a few joggers passing by and the occasional bird flying overhead. I didn't know what I was expecting from this meeting, but I was ready for whatever it might bring. Karen arrived a few minutes late. She looked nothing like the confident, polished woman I had once known. Her face was pale, and she had lost weight. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and there was a weariness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. She hesitated when she saw me, her steps faltering as if she wasn't sure whether to approach or turn back. "Brian," she began, her voice small and strained. "Thank you for meeting me." I didn't respond right away, watching her carefully. "What do you want, Karen?" She took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting nervously. I just wanted to explain, to apologize." I crossed my arms, my expression unreadable. "You've had plenty of time to explain. Why now?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I'd seen her cry before, and I knew better than to let her tears affect me. "I'm sorry, Brian. I'm sorry for everything. I made so many mistakes, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you that I understand what I did. I ruined everything, and I'm living with that every day." I remained silent, letting her continue. She swallowed hard, her voice shaking. "After you left, after everything, I lost everything. My job, my friends, even my parents barely speak to me now. It's like I don't exist anymore. And I know I deserve it. I know that." I watched her for a moment, the pain in her voice clear. But I wasn't sure what she wanted from me. Pity? Redemption? There was nothing I could give her that would change what had happened. "I didn't come here for sympathy," she continued, her voice breaking. I wanted you to know that I've been going to therapy. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did, why I destroyed everything we had." For the first time, her words didn't sound like excuses. They sounded like regret, but it wasn't enough. I didn't want to hear about her guilt or her struggles, didn't erase what she had done. "Karen," I said slowly, "I don't care why you did it anymore. You had years to come clean, to fix this before it got this far. But you didn't. You chose to lie, to cheat, and now you're paying the price for that. I'm not here to absolve you of anything." She nodded, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. "I know," she whispered. I miss you. I miss what we had. And I know I destroyed it, but I miss it." For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt something other than anger or betrayal when I looked at her. It was pity, not because of what she had done, but because she was still clinging to something that no longer existed. "What we had is gone, Karen," I said softly. "It's been gone for a long time. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed everything we built. I can't ever trust you again, and without trust, there's nothing left." She looked down, her shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. "I know," she whispered again, "but I needed to hear it from you." We stood there for a long moment in silence, the river flowing steadily behind us, the world continuing to move forward even though our marriage had long since ended. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," I said finally. "But it's not me. Not anymore." Karen nodded, a sad, resigned smile crossing her face. "Thank you, Brian, for meeting me, for telling me the truth." With that, she turned and walked away, her figure growing smaller as she disappeared into the distance. I stood there for a while, watching the river. I thought I'd feel a sense of finality after seeing her again, but instead, I felt lighter, like something had finally lifted. Karen was part of my past, but that's all she was now, the past. I turned and walked back toward my car, feeling a strange sense of peace. My life was no longer tangled in lies and betrayal. I was free, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to move forward. As I drove home from the park, the finality of my conversation with Karen settled in. The chapter that had consumed so much of my life was truly over. The weight that had been bearing down on me for months, maybe even years, was finally lifted. Karen was no longer a part of my life. She was just a memory, one I would eventually let go of completely. That night, I sat on my apartment's balcony, Max curled up at my feet, staring out at the city lights. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The anger that had fueled me, that had driven my need for revenge, was gone. In its place was something far more powerful: clarity. I had done what I needed to do, and now it was time to focus on what came next. I spent the next few weeks throwing myself into my work and reconnecting with the people I had distanced myself from. Jake, the old friend I'd run into, had become a regular part of my life again, and we started hanging out on weekends, hitting up fishing spots like we used to do back in high school. It felt good to have someone to talk to, someone who wasn't connected to the mess with Karen, someone who knew me before all of this. I also started to reconnect with myself in ways I hadn't anticipated. I began taking small trips on my boat, spending weekends sailing along the coast. The open water reminded me of why I had loved being a sailor in the first place. Out there, with the wind in my face and the horizon stretching out endlessly, everything felt possible again. Life was simpler, clearer. One Saturday, while I was out on the water, I docked in a small coastal town a few miles from Savannah. I wandered through the local market, enjoying the anonymity of the place. No one knew who I was or what I'd been through. It felt like a clean slate, and as I walked through the stalls, I found myself drawn to a woman selling handcrafted wooden furniture. She was around my age, with warm eyes and a quiet smile. Her name was Rachel, and she owned a small woodworking shop in town. We struck up a conversation, and something about her calm, grounded energy intrigued me. She wasn't flashy or overly talkative, just real. I ended up buying a small hand-carved box from her, though I didn't really need it. It was just an excuse to stay and talk a little longer. We exchanged numbers before I left, and as I sailed back home that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I began texting, and eventually, I found myself making the hour-long drive to her shop just to spend time with her. Our conversations were easy, free of the complications and drama that had filled my life for so long. She didn't pry into my past, and I didn't feel the need to explain it. We were just two people getting to know each other, and it felt refreshingly simple. Rachel wasn't flashy, but she was thoughtful and kind, and being around her reminded me of what it meant to trust someone again. We started going on hikes, exploring the nearby coastline, and grabbing dinner in small, out-of-the-way places. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much I had been missing. One evening, after a long day at her shop, we sat on the porch of her cottage, watching the sunset over the ocean. Rachel turned to me and asked, "So, what's next for you, Brian? You've been through so much. Where do you see yourself going?" I thought about her question for a moment, staring out at the horizon. "I'm not sure," I admitted. For a long time, I let my life revolve around someone else. My job, my marriage, it all felt like it was tied to something bigger than me. But now, I guess I'm just figuring out who I am without all that. Rachel smiled softly, resting her hand on mine. "That's a good place to start." I looked at her, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the desperate, all-consuming need to fix something broken. It was steady, quiet, like the waves lapping against the shore. It was new, but it felt solid. Over the next few months, my relationship with Rachel grew into something I hadn't expected. We spent more time together, taking things slow, allowing the connection to build naturally. It wasn't rushed or forced, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the pressure to be anything other than myself. One day, after a particularly long week at work, I found myself driving to the house Karen and I had shared. The place was empty now, waiting to be sold, but I wanted one last look before it was gone for good. As I walked through the quiet, echoing rooms, I thought about everything that had happened there: the good, the bad, and the ugly. It was the end of an era, but I was okay with that. When I stepped out onto the front porch, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. This chapter was finally done. I had made mistakes, been betrayed, and gone through hell. But I had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and most importantly free. I locked the door behind me and walked away, knowing I would never return. As I drove back to Rachel's, with the sun setting in the distance and Max's head resting on my lap, I realized that I wasn't just moving on from Karen, I was moving on from the anger, the need for revenge, and the bitterness that had consumed me for so long. Rachel had helped me see that life wasn't about winning or losing. It was about healing, about finding peace, and about building something new out of the wreckage. And as I looked ahead at the road stretching out before me, I knew that the best was still to come. The horizon was wide open. Discover more stories. Subscribe today.